You're not even going to do the actual, like, see you on the threshing floor next time?
No, because it's not a different video. It's the same video. What? It's legit. So focus. Hi, good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever it is for you. It's good night for us. Welcome to the threshing floor. I am Matt. This is my lovely bright angel. This is where we try to find truth by separating wheat from chaff and grow together through God and Christ-centered conversation. We have some new technology and a new mic that we're trying out and stuff, so hopefully the audio is a little bit better. That's what this is here for, is for tracking some of the points we want to make and making sure video, audio, and all that is still going good. We're going to try and work some other ways of doing this, but we wanted to come together tonight and have a conversation about the banning of ideas.
Censoring of information.
Censoring of information. Our last video was about taking genuine effort to seek truth when truth is hard to find, and not just stopping short at things like headlines and assuming that you know what something is without actually researching it.
That becomes even more important when you have narratives being pushed, when you have information being censored and voices being banned and forbidden, in a way.
We're getting into interesting times where it's not book burnings anymore because we have a digital landscape. There's nothing to burn. So what they do instead, what people do, is ban ideas, shout people down,
silence voices,
block accounts, get people run off of college campuses, which happens all the time. It is the modern day equivalent of book burnings and of running people out of town. And it is unfortunately a short throw from that to burning people. The books are just the kindling, and we have to be prepared and have to stand against the idea of banning ideas. And so we wanted to go through that as a conversation and kind of see where it goes. We've got a few examples, a lot of historical examples, which prayerfully I don't have to list for you, that you can come up with plenty of them that prove the point already. But we do have a few to talk through, and then a couple of modern, I say, things that are happening right now that are proof positive that information en masse is being suppressed. That literally your ability to find information is being actively removed. And this is we have stories on that. And then there's one little kind of side item, probably toward the end, that we'll get into, that is frightening to say the least, especially because this has been something that has been talked about for a few years, that people in general in Western culture have been told, no, that will never happen. Well, here it is happening in America, in this state, in the state of Texas in which we live, which no one would ever think would be the first place, maybe not the first place, but one of the early adopters of this idea. So anyway, banning of ideas. We should not be afraid of dissenting views. As Christians, especially, I will speak to that as Christians, we should not fear anything, first of all. Second of all, any idea that goes against God, we shouldn't be afraid of it. If there is an idea out there that stands in the face of God, you do stand up against it. You speak truth at all times, of course, but you should never be afraid of those ideas. You should never be, as long as you stand on truth and you preach the truth, you speak the truth in love, you never should ever have fear of anything, like terror, because that's when book burnings come. It's when you can't stand up against an idea because you either don't understand it, which is what we talked about last time, or you're unable to counteract it. And instead of admitting that you don't know everything because there's only one who does, then you want to be proven right. You want to be the one who's right. And so you have to shout down an idea that seems like it may be right when you're not. It's a very natural way for humans to go, but it is a sinful state when we think we are right to the point that we are willing to remove any opposition to us.
To inflict violence on others simply because what they say or what they think or what they do is different than what we think and say and do.
And some of the historical examples, this is the way people have always been. And
this is not new.
This is not new.
And
Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun.
And there's a very valid point that I've seen a lot of friends posting on social media recently, is simply we are reliving history. That old adage of those who do not study or know history are doomed to repeat it. We are living through that right now. Every large society, every nation or empire that has come about, every single one of them has gone through an almost identical cycle. They start here, they go up, they reach a pinnacle, and then it starts to degrade. And often it will degrade slowly, and then it'll hit a point where it's just full speed downhill. And often the most common characteristics through history of each one of those cycles is they reach a point where they start silencing views. They start with a certain set of values. Over time, those values start to narrow, and the values that they held start to be eroded or discarded. And instead, then the fringe values that were effectively oppressed during that time, they then come out and they have a rise in gaining in popularity and acceptance of those things, to where effectively over time, culture does a shift. And the things that once were considered good and the things that were considered bad switch positions. And then once you reach that point where the vast majority of things that were initially not acceptable in society then become not just acceptable, but promoted. And then if you oppose those things, you then are the enemy. And at that point, the ones who were persecuted or judged or and wrongfully so in a lot of cases were hurt, were killed for their view that was not acceptable. Now they become the oppressors, and it flips, and it is this terrible cycle of oppressor becoming the oppressor, or oppressee becoming the oppressor. And then at that point, once things have completely shifted and flipped, you start to see the censoring of the views. No longer are you allowed to even talk about those things that were once foundational to the culture. You then have this very violent uprising, very, very harsh in the way that they treat others. There is no more civility. There is no more caring for your neighbor if they have opposite views from you. And that's what we see now. We see a lot of fundamental things that had been the standard in America have now become what is outright condemned. This is a little bit off topic, but it's a simple example of your standard nuclear family, which was once touted as the basis of civilization, of the stronghold, and was, the building of families was incredibly valuable, because then you have strong marriages that then train up children to become strong, active leaders in their community and helpers and good citizens. Now we have a complete shift on that, where you are frowned upon and condemned if you tout traditional marriage. You are frowned upon and condemned if you claim that a child needs two loving parents to raise them, a man and a woman specifically. And so things completely flip on their head. The oppressee becomes the oppressor. And then comes, the people, the groups of people, or the people who place themselves under these labels and in these groups that were oppressed, they then are they have reached such an emotional height that they cannot abide by you even having that opinion. So then enters things like, we need employee training, to anti-discrimination training, sensitivity training. We need to rewire the way that you think to a certain extent. We need to retrain you. We need to condition you, because the way that you think is wrong. And when that continues, when people continue to hold these ideas that are now contrary to culture at large, it becomes, okay, well, we just have to shut you up. We've tried retraining you. It's still an ongoing problem. Now we need to shut you up. We need to ban your Twitter account. We need to burn your books. And the quote, something that Matt referenced earlier, was the burning of books is simply a stepping stone towards the Roman human torches. Heinrich Heine was a poet and literary critic in the early 1800s in Germany. And he is quoted 100 years before, 105, 110, roughly, 1821, but roughly 100 years before Hitler came into power, as saying, where they have burned books, they will end in burning human beings. And this was in reference to something that had happened there in the 1800s, was not something that he was just saying or referencing as something way back in history. He was talking about, in recent living memory of him, that people had been burning books, and it leads down that route every single time. When you feel that violence is the only way to silence an opposing opinion or an opposing idea, then there is nothing to keep you from murdering, because it's completely justified. Well, those people were evil, so I had to stop them and their evil ideas from spreading. The article, it is on learnreligions.com, and it was posted January 28th, 2019, by a man named Austin Klein, and in it is where I found that quote from Heinrich Heine. And Mr. Klein here goes on to say, after quoting Heinrich Heine, the first point to consider is why people would burn books at all. The Nazis didn't just burn any books. They burned the books of Jews, communists, socialists, and other degenerates. They didn't simply burn books which they found disagreeable. The books which advocated ideas which they believed would undermine the health, safety, and welfare of the German nation. Now, something that whenever I initially brought this up to Matt, his first response was, well, how does one define an idea which would undermine the health, safety, and welfare of a nation? To which my response was, you don't. It's subjective. It is whatever the people who have the power and authority to get rid of such ideas deem it to be. So if you're not careful, oh my goodness, I can't remember the old poem of "They came for the Jew, and I did not stand up, and they came for this, they came for that, and then they came for me, and there was no one to stand up for it." So a really good point of this is cancel culture. It's been growing over the last several years, and it has now reached a peak where they've turned on themselves. First, it was whatever label you want to call it, the left, Democrats, etc., etc. But it was a particular group of people with a particular ideology that was starting to use their ability to get things shut down and to boycott and such, to silence effectively, or to at least show that they did not agree with this whatever their opinion or their viewpoint or whatever. Now it has turned where they're now canceling their own side. No one is safe. It is a snake eating its own tail. When you start down this path, it leads to destruction, and it leads to destruction on both sides. So if you advocate for ideas being silenced, a word of caution: what is to keep them from silencing your ideas when the tables flip? When they decide that you've made a Twitter post that they disagree with, when you've posted a video on Facebook that they disagree with, what's to keep you, who might agree with them 99%, what's to keep them from canceling you?
And if you say, well, all of my ideas are good and they will agree with me, think about how many people you agree with 100%. My pastor, about a year and a half ago, made a very interesting statement that I really thought over. And it's, I don't agree with anybody 100% because nobody agrees with me 100%. And that's what it looks like to be human. We all have something different. Angel and I found out today, especially through a very long conversation that we had, that we genuinely do have differences, and everyone does. That's you're made unique, and that's a beautiful thing, and we have to really embrace that.
Not
because
only that,
if we don't, then literally anyone can stand up against anyone. It only matters who's in power, who has the power to silence others. They will be silenced. So if you think you're immune to it, I guarantee you're not. It will take only one thought that will condemn you, and that will be the end of it.
And on that point, not only do I not agree 100% with anybody else because they don't agree with me 100%, I don't agree with myself 100% from 5 years ago, from 2 years ago. That's a very important point of part of the cancel culture, is pulling up old articles or old Twitter posts or whatever. So-and-so said something Literally, there was a Boeing executive that got fired for something he said in an article he wrote 33 years ago. And there are people who have been...
Are you the same person now that you were 33 years ago? Because she hadn't been born yet.
So...
I was 2. 4. How old am I? 3. I was 3.
That's a regular occurrence, just so y'all know.
But seriously, 33 years ago, are you kidding me?
5 years ago.
5 years ago. It was bad when this stuff started. When you would hear that somebody got fired or got seriously reprimanded for something that they had posted 5 years ago. Well, it's grown to the point now where we're talking decades ago. People did things, and
now that they may not, that they've already come out, apologized for years ago, stated and lived consistently in a very drastically different way, and say, I was wrong, I've learned better since then, and they're still paying the price for something they said decades ago when they might have been a completely different person.
So this is where the banning of ideas goes.
Every single time.
Every single time. If you're going to suppress an idea, then it will lead to the burning of books, and then it will lead to the burning of people in some way, shape, or form. This is the way it always goes.
Do you mind if I read another quick excerpt from this?
How about it?
The Learned Religions post. People don't burn books simply because they disagree with the message of the books. They burn books because the message of the books is a considered threat, a serious threat. In fact, not something remote and theoretical. No one goes around burning the books of fringe groups which don't pose a real threat. Burning books, however, doesn't eliminate whatever threat they might pose. Books are merely the means by which a message is communicated. Eliminating them may slow the growth of the message, but it certainly can't eliminate the message itself. To be fair, it's unlikely that a message could ever really be eliminated, but people who burn books probably won't believe that. If they really truly want to eliminate a message which they perceive to be a serious threat, they will have to go to the source of that message, the people responsible for the books. Shutting down publishing houses is one step to take, but shutting down the authors themselves will be necessary at some point. Is it enough to simply lock those authors up and prevent them from talking to others? That's expensive, and it isn't permanent. After all, they didn't take the books and shut them up in a warehouse. Permanent elimination of the message requires permanently eliminating the authors of the message. If books can be burned to destroy them, why not burn people to destroy them as well? This eliminates the message and all traces of the messenger as well. Today, I saw several people sharing and saw it on news websites that in Portland, you have people burning Bibles. Now, I saw somebody comment and make the defense of, well, it's 2 people in a parking lot burning like 3 or 4 Bibles. It's not that big of a deal. But that's where it starts. To let that be permissible, even on a small scale, not to let it be permissible, because we're not going to go out and use violence against them. We're no better than them in that case. But to allow it to dismiss it as unimportant, or it's not a big deal, to dismiss it and not speak out against it, and to not sound the warning to others that, look, they're burning this, what do they burn next?
Because that's the other side of what, that's what we're kind of not saying here, is we're not saying that you go out and put violence on people who are trying to ban books. That's obviously counterproductive to what we're saying. And we're not saying that you stand by passively, when it's not going on or something like that. No, you definitely stand against these ideas. When somebody's burning Bibles, when somebody's burning a flag, I don't care what country it is, if you're burning a flag, there's a problem. When you're standing, when somebody is standing up and acting in violence from an idea, you definitely stand up against them, but not in violence. You stand up and say the truth. Speak to them the truth in love, because I don't want you to think that way. That's not a good way to think. It's not a good place to go. And to help them understand what it is that's wrong. And again, not to condemn their ideas, because we all have different ideas, but to talk it through with somebody. Again, that's what the whole channel is about, is actually
growing through conversation, through Christ-centered
talking
conversation for us
together,
specifically.
actually conversing, actually separating wheat from chaff, and not just getting hung up on all of it, because you do have to parse through it. I had a list of examples in history, and it's Socrates, Galileo, Inquisitions, Hitler. I mean, there's lots of them, and that was just a quick glance through different things that of societies that have
Chinese
stood
Cultural
up.
Revolution in the 60s.
Yeah, my list was entirely Western, and she came up with this whole list of Eastern ones too that are just crazy.
As recently as December 2019, you have a article here on foreignpolicy.com on a China briefing from December 11th, 2019, where it is reported that evidence that government officials burned books at a library in a county in northwestern Gansu province in China. I'm not going to attempt to say the name of the county, because let's all face it, I would butcher it. And it probably sounds a lot prettier when they say it. But apparently, a screenshot of an article posted to the state-run library's website showing two women burning a pile of illegal books, religious publications, and especially books and articles with biases went viral on something called WeChat, which I've never heard of, sparking thousands of negative comments, mainly of which were subsequently censored. The book burning was part of a campaign launched in October by the Ministry of Education that called on school libraries across China to remove books that supposedly smeared the Chinese Communist Party and its leaders, or that harmed society's order. Here's again the idea of the health, welfare, and order of society.
And if you
safety,
have,
that was the other word.
if you have a moderate understanding of American history, this is your Sedition Act. I think that's what this is you're not allowed to say anything bad against the government.
Yeah. And this county borders on a particular region, which again I'm not going to try and butcher, home to 20% of China's Hui Muslims, and it seems likely, though not certain, that Muslim texts were also destroyed in it. So again, we have this censoring of, well, that's not good for our culture, or we can't let the people hear that. And any opposing viewpoint, anything that threatens power or threatens the status quo or cultural norm, this is what they target. Recently, there was a news article where there had been a couple of parents who had posted on social media a picture of a dumpster out back of a school that was full to the brim with what largely, according to the report, seemed to be nonfiction type books, all across the board type books. And when the school itself was reached out to for comment, they basically said, well, we do this every 10 years. We go through and get rid of outdated books and all of this. And the parents' outcry was simply, why didn't you donate them? Why didn't you do a book sale? Why didn't you try to rehome this dumpster full of books that had cultural books, that had animal information type books? They was all across the spectrum. But why did you just dump all of these books that are in good condition? And one of the arguments was, well, because of COVID, we could not, there was a risk of contamination, to which a lot of people responded, current medical guidelines say that COVID cannot be sustained on surface, cannot live on surfaces for more than 2 days. Children have been out of school for 2 months, 2 or 3 months at the point. And they were like, that's not a valid reason to dump all of these books. What is going on? And there was no answer to that.
And we're not saying that it was intentional by the state or anything like that. Like, we're not going to.
But there was a level of
weird, legitimate. Just what?
Yeah. And there were comments of there seemed to be a large amount of cultural and history books that the vast majority of it seemed to be historical nonfiction type books.
So
what do you do with that information? Well, we don't have the entire story. They're not giving more information on it. But it is something to be aware of. It is concerning to a certain extent when we don't know the motive behind it. And that's not to be a conspiracy theorist.
Well, no,
but
that story is fairly anecdotal.
Yes.
I'll grant you. It is an anecdotal story. And it as much shows the genuine concern that anecdote comes up.
Well, that the idea that, well, every 10 years we go through and we get rid of outdated books, and you're okay with just throwing them in the trash.
Well, no. What I mean is, it's the fact that we hear that story and we hesitate on it.
Yeah.
Like there's something wrong. Like,
you can't necessarily even put your finger on it.
We're in a culture, we're in a society where we go, what do you mean throwing away dumpsters full of books?
Yeah.
Like, what are you trying to hide? Like, that's where we go, because that's the assumption now, is that you're trying to hide something, because we're in a culture where those things often happen. Not the throwing away of dumpsters full of books, but the heightened idea of information suppression.
We have had so many political campaigns on, I'm going to be transparent. Transparency in government.
So sick of transparency.
Yeah, draining the swamp. All of those different catchphrases and taglines and etc. We all recognize that people aren't being honest with each other. That people are hiding things. People in power specifically are hiding things. Which brings us into...
What? Sorry, I did not follow your transition there.
Just to continue. I'm not going to write a segue. Anyways, yeah, I know you think they're fun.
They segues are a wonderful means of mobility for people who have a sense of balance. I might get a laptop thrown at me, I'm just saying. If I do, I won't cut it out, I promise.
No, because I'd probably end up injuring myself in the process of trying to throw something at it.
And the laptop. We wouldn't break the laptop, honestly. I'll be fine.
I'm not going to advocate violence against my husband
for
just
having
because he has an opposing viewpoint on how
that's fun.
How well balanced or not well balanced his wife is.
That's more of a scientific conjecture than an opinion, just saying.
So, anyways, continuing along with the point of censoring ideas and lack of transparency. Yeah.
There's other ones that I want to get into. There's certain topics that are entire other videos of their own, which we probably will eventually because there's no avoiding it. But the church also has largely, and I don't mean the church like capital C, like Roman Catholics. I don't mean the church like whatever. I'm not talking about anybody in particular. But there have been large inquisitions run by state churches that your doctrine is wrong, and so we can't let you spread. So the church
are not immune.
Is not immune to this.
You're a heretic.
Angel and I genuinely believe in the remnant, what we modern day colloquially call the remnant, which is the thread of genuine believers in Christ, genuine believers in the one true God who are always seeking Him. And it kind of, for us at least, it begins with Elijah and the 7,000.
Elijah.
And so we genuinely believe those rare instances of people who genuinely are seeking God's, or people after God's own heart, as David was described, that when opposing viewpoints come up, we don't shout them down. We seek to genuinely understand them and steer the person away from those ideas. It's not, there's an example I want to use, and I'm just not ready to go there yet. But I can go with the larger point of things like the Spanish Inquisition and stuff like that. That if you don't hold the right view, well, you're a heretic, you can't spread your ideas, and so you get burned at the stake. What we are called to is Priscilla and Aquila. We come across somebody who's preaching the wrong gospel. Or in their case, they were speaking to Apollos. I can never remember if there's an S in the end. But the one who was preaching the baptism of John, and he hadn't heard about Jesus yet. That's not exactly a heretical view by any means. But their approach was not to shout him down in the synagogue where he was teaching. Their approach was to pull him aside and tell him the gospel. Like, complete his information. Tell him the rest of the story. So, and his response in Scripture, his response is to begin preaching the full gospel. He just didn't have all the information. And that's what we were talking about in our last video. Or was that in our intro? Now I can't remember. We've got 2 videos and I'm already forgetting content.
I have to make a flow chart just to keep it straight.
We'll post it right behind there so I can always see it. What was the thought?
Preaching the whole gospel when you have not enough information.
That we have to be, having the gaps filled in, we have to be open to that. Because Apollos very much could go, well, I didn't see Jesus, so y'all take a flying leap. He had to be open to being wrong, essentially, and being willing to process through new information and actually internalize it and move through and move on with that. So that's what we're trying to get at is you shouldn't be afraid of ideas. Ideas can't hurt anybody. People with bad ideas will always hurt somebody.
This distinctly goes back to something that the world has always struggled with ever since Cain answered God by saying, "Am I my brother's keeper?" We are to be a genuine friend to our neighbor. And who is your neighbor? The person next to you. The person next to you on the subway, the children in your home, the relatives that you see at holidays, whatever. Anyone you are around, you are to be neighborly to them. And when you're in a discussion and you hear a false idea, or not a false idea, a faulty idea, or potentially even, an idea that could have dangerous repercussion if acted on, it is then your job as your neighbor to lovingly and kindly give them more information. When you have somebody touting systems of what we label as communism or socialism or whatever it is, whenever you have somebody attacking capitalism, attacking this, attacking that idea, and promoting in its place these ideas that have been proven throughout history to do nothing but cause suffering and harm and death. Millions upon millions of people have died from the ideas that Karl Marx put forth.
The Black Book of Communism. Look it up.
These ideas were simply ideas. Then people acted on them because they didn't fully understand. They didn't have all of the information. And now there were people who genuinely promote these things out of a place of, I do want to help people. There are people who, wanting universal health care, wanting a standard living wage. They see a problem and they see that that's not what's being done to fix it now. What's being done right now isn't helping, so let's try something else. Well, the problem is they're not students of history. The problem is they're not looking at the rest of the world right now and really understanding what's going on there in those countries that do practice these things.
Well, we've never done that. Yeah, but many others have.
There's a
I won't give an example.
There's a quote that I just read today. Socialism made my life in Cuba unbearable and dangerous, and I find it ridiculous that anyone in America would want that. When's the last time you saw someone escaping the U.S. on a raft to go to socialist Cuba? Ray Armas. Now, here's the thing. People right now, people who promote these ideas that have been proven to be harmful, I'm not saying capitalism is the answer, because capitalism is perverted just as easily. But I'm saying that the people who promote these ideas that have been historically proven to be harmful and now are violently advocating for these things to be implemented here, genuinely don't have all of the information. And when it comes to censoring information, which a lot of socialist and communist countries do, they have insulated internet. What is it? It's North Korea, right? That has, they have their own infrastructure for internet. They're not allowed to have information from outside of their country.
Yeah, China's got that too.
China, yeah, as well. And whenever you have a censoring of information, you no longer can really weigh any of those things. History goes out the door. You can no longer learn from it. You can no longer compare what's going on now with what's happened in the past when other things were tried. And therefore, we're doomed to repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah. This is why these mistakes are repeated. Not just we will repeat the mistake. No, check history. Those mistakes are repeated all the time. And we see them regularly.
And one of the great follies and one of the great deceptions that happens when we have generations come up and say, that they want to implement these ideas. The great deception is the thought of, well, I can do it better. We've learned from what they did, we'll do it better. Well, no, we've got more resources, we've got more technology, we can do it better than they did. There's no reason that we can't. And unfortunately, they're having the wrong conversation. Their understanding of it is wrong because they think that the problem of why those ideas failed so miserably in the past was because of a lack of technology, a lack of resources, a lack of understanding. They don't realize it's fundamentally inherent it's built into these ideas that they simply don't work.
And if you shout down, and this is from the other side, if you do stand against socialism, communism, whatever, and you think that there are horrible ideas and that they will only lead to the worst civilizations ever.
And then you advocate.
No. And then you think shutting those ideas down is a good idea. Then what happens when the next generation comes up and has never heard of those ideas?
Yep.
It's self-defeating.
Yep.
If you ban those ideas entirely, someone else will come up with them on their own and not know how bad the idea was.
Information. And here's the thing. There's been a huge surge in, well, we need to stem the flow of misinformation. But here's the thing. When you allow somebody, anybody, to have the authority to tell you what's misinformation and what's not, and then to limit your ability to verify and fact check them, hey, look at that. They can tell you anything they want.
I mean, literally, this is the, in church history, this was the one of the strongest points that the reformers had in standing against the Catholic Church of the time was nobody can read the scriptures that you are reading from. Nobody speaks the language. Nobody can read that language. Most people can't even read.
One of them.
So you can literally say anything and claim that it's in the Bible and get away with it. It's one of the big things that they stood against at the time of the Reformation was getting it in everybody's hands. And so if you don't actually research things, then you would never know that Scripture actually tells you to research things.
Study like a Berean.
Paul lauds the Bereans because they checked him on it. They didn't just take his word for it. He's Paul. Who's gonna disagree with Paul? I mean, he's the man who stood up to Peter and won. Who's gonna stand up to him? And his response was to absolutely laud the Bereans because they checked him on it. Hi, so that video was getting very long, so we decided to cut it right there. We get off into another topic, basically. It still pertains to what we're talking about, but it's more of a modern day kind of contemporary example, and it's a specific topic. So we just cut it there. So expect to see part 2 coming up here very shortly. Bye.